The champagne flute had barely touched my lips when I heard it. Not the polite tinkle of crystal toasting, or the predictable thud of a clumsy guest dropping a canapé. No, this was a sound that bypassed my ears and lodged itself directly into my spine, a wet, hollow, percussive crunch that I felt in my molars. I turned, and for a breathless, elongated moment, the entire grand ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic was a living painting. 150 guests, draped in the garden formal attire the invitation had so smugly demanded, stood frozen mid-gesture. The string quartet, hired at exorbitant cost to saw their way through a saccharine rendition of Perfect, screeched to a discordant halt. Every face was turned toward the base of the grand sweeping staircase that Melinda Harrington had spent 20 minutes descending, milking every flashbulb like the star of her own tragic opera. My 15-year-old son Liam stood over her. His rented black suit jacket was still buttoned, his posture rigid as a steel beam. But his right hand was lowered, knuckles already swelling and split, a thin line of blood, her blood, trailing down the back of his wrist. Melinda was crumpled on the bottom 3 steps like a discarded marionette. The custom Vera Wang gown, a monstrosity of hand-stitched lace and ivory silk that had cost more than my annual salary, was no longer pristine. A violent, blooming crimson flower was spreading from the center of her face outward, soaking the delicate Alençon lace, turning the ivory into a morbid watercolor. Her hands were clamped over the lower half of her face, but I could see it clearly from across the room. The new, grotesque angle of her nose twisted sharply to the left, and the steady arterial stream of blood that poured between her fingers and down her neck, pooling in the hollow of her collarbone. The sound that escaped her wasn't a scream. It was a wet, gurgling, animalistic keen that cut through the dead silence like a scalpel. My ex-husband, David, stood 3 feet away, his champagne glass suspended halfway to his lips, his face cycling through a kaleidoscope of emotions. Shock, confusion, and then finally, the familiar toxic rage I knew so well. His father, the venerable Judge Theodore Harrington, was already rising from his seat at the head table, his ancient patrician face unreadable. He wasn't looking at Melinda's ruined face. He was looking at Liam with the cold, detached calculation of a man assessing the value of a damaged asset. And Liam? Liam was breathing in great, heaving gusts, his chest rising and falling under the stiff fabric of his suit. He wasn't crying. He wasn't screaming. He was staring down at the woman bleeding at his feet, with an expression that shattered my heart into a million sharp pieces. Pure, unadulterated relief, mixed with a terrifying ancient sorrow. Liam! I dropped my clutch purse. It skittered across the polished marble floor, scattering lipstick and breath mints. I didn't care. I was moving before my brain could form a coherent thought, my heels threatening to twist my ankles with every frantic step. Then Liam spoke. His voice wasn't loud. It was low and steady, the voice of a boy who had carried a secret so heavy for so long that speaking it aloud felt like shedding a physical weight. In the vacuum of noise that followed the scream, it carried with the clarity of a church bell. "Touch my brother again," he said, his eyes never leaving Melinda's crumpled form, "and I'll break more than your nose." The spell shattered. Pandemonium erupted. Mrs. Harrington the elder, a woman who looked like she'd been upholstered in Chanel tweed, began shrieking about lawsuits and assault charges. David finally dropped his glass, it shattered on the floor, a cheap sound effect for a tawdry scene, and lunged forward, his face purple with a fury that was only partly about his bleeding bride. "Claire!" he roared, his head snapping toward me as I finally reached Liam's side. "Look what your animal did! Look what you've turned him into! You've poisoned him against us!" I ignored him completely. I had spent 14 years of marriage and 3 years of divorce learning to filter out David Harrington's voice. It was white noise, a mosquito whining in my ear. My entire world had narrowed to the trembling, rigid form of my son. I placed my hand on Liam's back, between his shoulder blades. The heat radiating off him was intense, like touching the hood of a car that had been driven too hard. He was vibrating, a fine, high-frequency tremor that I could feel deep in my own bones. He finally turned his head to look at me. The rage that had been blazing in his dark brown eyes just seconds before, guttered and died, replaced by something far more devastating. The mask of the stoic, protective older brother crumbled. His lower lip quivered, and his eyes, those eyes that used to light up when he talked about building robots or watching Star Wars marathons, welled with tears that he was fighting with every ounce of his 15-year-old willpower. "Mom," he whispered. The word cracked in the middle. I couldn't let him go to their house next weekend. I couldn't. She whispered something to him during the pictures. I saw his face. He looked just like I used to look. I couldn't. I pulled him into my arms, right there in front of the judge, the bleeding bride, and 100 horrified members of Seattle's elite. He was taller than me now, all sharp angles and long limbs, but in that moment, he was my little boy again, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I felt the wet heat of his tears soaking through the thin silk of my dress at the shoulder. His body shook with silent, suppressed sobs. I held him tighter, my own eyes burning. Over his shoulder, I could see David, now being restrained by 2 of his groomsmen, his face a mask of theatrical fury. I saw Judge Harrington still standing, still watching. His eyes flickered from Liam to me, and then, almost imperceptibly, to the youngest member of our shattered family. Evan, my 8-year-old. He was standing near the dessert table, his small face pale as milk, his hands clutching the fabric of his little suit pants. His aunt, my sister Maggie, was already kneeling beside him, trying to shield him from the chaos. But I saw his eyes. They weren't on the blood or the screaming adults. They were fixed on Liam with a look of utter, desperate adoration. And something else. Safety. "It's okay, baby," I whispered into Liam's damp hair. My voice was thick but steady. "You did what you had to do. I've got you now. I've got you both." I meant every word. And as I stood there holding my son while the world burned down around us, a hot, fierce, and unapologetic pride bloomed in my chest. It was a wild, untamed thing, and it felt a lot like freedom. The police came, of course. In the Harrington universe, a 15-year-old boy defending his brother from a predator is an act of criminal violence requiring immediate law enforcement intervention. A woman grooming and abusing a child in her own home, however, is a private family matter best handled discreetly, behind closed doors, with the aid of expensive therapists who specialize in making inconvenient truths disappear. They didn't arrest Liam. There were too many witnesses who had seen only the punch, but they had also seen a boy who looked terrified, not triumphant. A boy who was now clinging to his mother like a much younger child, his body wrecked with the aftershocks of an adrenaline crash. The officers, a weary-looking man in his 50s and a younger woman with kind eyes, took statements. They were professional, but I saw the flicker of something human in the woman's expression when Liam, his voice barely a whisper, said, "She was going to hurt my little brother. I had to stop her." I gave my statement with a clarity that surprised even me. My hands were shaking, but my voice was calm. Melinda lunged for my younger son, Evan. She had a look on her face I've seen before. Liam intercepted her. He was protecting his brother. It was a lie, technically. I hadn't seen the exact moment of the lunge. But I knew the context. I knew the truth that had been buried under layers of Harrington money, legal maneuvering, and a family code of silence that was thicker than blood. And so did Liam. The drive home from the police precinct was a quiet descent into a different kind of reality. The Seattle rain, a persistent, drizzling mist that seemed to weep from the sky, streaked the windshield. The city lights blurred into soft, impressionistic smears of color. Liam sat in the passenger seat, his head resting against the cool glass of the window, his knuckles now cleaned and bandaged by a sympathetic EMT, resting in his lap. "Evan okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse and raw. "He's with Aunt Maggie," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "They're at her place. She said he's eaten half a pint of mint chip ice cream and is currently building a very elaborate pillow fort while watching Bluey. He thinks you're a superhero. He told Maggie that you flew down and saved him from the bad lady." Liam let out a sound that was half a choked laugh, half a sob. "Some superhero. I hit a girl. At her own wedding, in front of everyone." "You hit a pedophile who happened to be wearing a white dress and a lot of borrowed diamonds," I corrected him, my voice harder than I intended. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Don't let them reframe this, Liam. Don't you dare let them make you feel guilty for protecting your brother. She is not a victim. She is a predator. And that family knew." The transition came as the rain intensified, a steady, rhythmic drumming on the roof of the car that felt like a countdown, or maybe a heartbeat. He was quiet for a long, agonizing minute. The only sound was the swish thump of the windshield wipers and the distant rumble of thunder. Then, the words came out in a flood, a torrent of pain and memory that I knew had been dammed up for far too long. It was the same flood that had broken through 3 months ago, when he first told me the truth, but this time the details were sharper, more vivid. Evan didn't want to go to the wedding. Liam said, his voice distant, like he was narrating a documentary about someone else's life. He threw up this morning, twice, before Dad even picked him up. He was so scared, Mom. He was shaking, and Dad he just told him to man up and stop being a baby. He said Evan was embarrassing him. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my fingers ached. The casual cruelty of David Harrington was a wound that never fully healed. During the pictures, Liam continued, his voice gaining a terrible momentum, she was holding his hand. But she wasn't just holding it. She was digging her nails into his palm. I could see the little half-moon marks. And she was smiling this big, fake smile for the photographer. Evan's eyes were watering, but he was trying so hard not to cry. Because Dad told him not to embarrass the family. I felt bile rise in my throat. I swallowed it down. And then she bent down to fix his bow tie. She got real close to his ear, and I saw her whisper something. I couldn't hear it, but I saw Evan's face. It went completely white, like all the blood drained out of him. He looked like a ghost, Mom. He looked exactly like I used to look in the mirror after she left my room. That sentence. I used to look. It was the sentence that had haunted every waking moment of my life for the past 3 months. The years I lost. The years Liam was 12, 13, 14. The years the family court system, under the heavy corrupting influence of Judge Theodore Harrington's reputation, had decided that a boy needs his father. The years I had been relegated to every other weekend and Wednesday dinners. The years Melinda had been the fun stepmom. The one who let them stay up late watching R-rated movies. The one who bought them expensive video games and took them on special outings that were just for her and the special boy. The one who play wrestled a little too long, a little too close. Liam had told me everything 3 months ago on a rainy night just like this one. He had come home from a weekend at David's house and just shut down. He wouldn't eat. He wouldn't speak. He sat in his room with the lights off. I found him curled in a ball in his closet, clutching an old stuffed bear he hadn't touched in years. And then, in a voice that was barely a whisper, he told me about the games, the touching, the threats about being a bad boy who would break up the family if he told anyone, the way she would come into his room after David had passed out from too much scotch. And he told me what happened when he finally gathered the courage to tell his father. David had stared at him for a long moment, and then he had laughed. A short, ugly, disbelieving laugh. "Don't be ridiculous, Liam. Melinda loves you boys. She has a big heart. Sometimes she doesn't understand boundaries, that's all. She's just affectionate. You're twisting things in your head. Your mother has been filling you with these ideas, hasn't she? Trying to turn you against me, against our family. This is just a cry for attention, and I won't have it. You will not embarrass me with this kind of ugly talk." And then Liam, desperate, had gone to his grandfather. The judge. The pillar of the community. He had sat in that leather-upholstered study, surrounded by law books and pictures of the old man shaking hands with senators, and poured his heart out to a face carved from granite. Judge Harrington had listened. And then he had leaned forward, his cold blue eyes boring into Liam's soul, and said, "Son, we all make mistakes. Melinda is a spirited woman. She has a big heart. Sometimes she doesn't understand boundaries with the boys. It's a flaw, I admit. But it's not what you're implying. Don't embarrass this family with such ugly, unfounded talk. You'll regret it. We protect our own, Liam, and we crush anyone who tries to tear us apart. Do you understand?" They had protected her. They had known. The old man's words, "Sometimes she doesn't understand boundaries with the boys." That wasn't the language of shock or discovery. That was the language of containment, of management. He knew. He had known about the past mistake the stepmom's family had whispered about. He had known about the boys, and he had calculated that the cost of a scandal was higher than the cost of a few boundary issues with his grandchildren. "I believe you," I had said that night 3 months ago, holding my son as he shattered in my arms. "I believe every single word, and I am so sorry I couldn't stop it before. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder in that courtroom. I'm sorry I let them take you away from me." We went to the police. We went to Child Protective Services. We did everything the system tells you to do. And the system, that pristine, logical machine designed to protect the innocent, did exactly what it does best to victims of the wealthy and powerful. It failed. Spectacularly. Melinda's family closed ranks. Her brother, who had been overheard muttering, "Oh God, not again," at the engagement party, suddenly developed amnesia. Her mother, a woman with deep connections to the governor's office, made a few quiet phone calls. The first case, the one from another state, another young boy, was suddenly sealed tighter than a bank vault. With the judge's bottomless resources and a team of lawyers who specialized in making problems vanish, they painted Liam as a disgruntled child of divorce. A troubled teenager coached by a bitter, vindictive ex-wife to fabricate salacious lies. The case was ruled inconclusive. There wasn't enough physical evidence to proceed. David Harrington kept his full visitation rights. The legal system, in its infinite blind wisdom, had ruled that my 8-year-old son had to continue spending every other weekend in the same house as his abuser. The system had re-traumatized my son and then handed his brother back to the predator on a silver platter. "It's not fair," Liam whispered now in the car, his voice raw with a pain that was ancient and fresh all at once. "Dad gets to keep Evan. The law says he has to go. The law said I was a liar, so I fixed the law. I made sure she couldn't touch him again." I reached over and grabbed his hand. His knuckles were swollen under the bandage, but his grip was strong. "You didn't fix the law, baby," I said, my voice thick with a grief I couldn't fully name. "The law is still broken. It's a machine that protects people like the Harringtons and grinds up people like us. But you did the one thing the law couldn't do. You made her afraid. You showed her that there are consequences the courts can't erase. You showed Evan that someone will always fight for him, even if the whole world tells him to be quiet." Liam was silent for a long moment. Then, in a voice so small it broke my heart all over again, he said, "I just wanted her to stop, Mom. I just wanted it all to stop." "I know, baby," I said, "and now it will." The retaliation was swift, brutal, and entirely predictable. The Harringtons didn't fight fair. They fought with money, influence, and a chilling generational expertise in weaponizing the very legal system the patriarch had once served. By 9 o'clock the next morning, a process server was at my door, handing me a thick manila envelope. Inside was a civil suit for assault and battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and permanent disfigurement, filed on behalf of Melinda Harrington. The amount sought was astronomical, a number designed not to be paid, but to crush us under the weight of legal fees and fear. Attached was an emergency motion to strip me of all custody of Evan, alleging that I had incited, encouraged, and celebrated an act of felonious violence, and that my home was now a dangerous and unstable environment for a minor child. The language was vile. It painted me as a scheming, manipulative monster, and Liam as a feral, violent sociopath who needed to be institutionalized. It described the permanent disfigurement of poor, innocent Melinda, a woman who had dedicated her life to loving these troubled boys, in lurid, almost pornographic detail. I sat at my kitchen table, the papers spread out before me, and I felt the familiar, suffocating weight of their power, the bottomless resources, the connections, the way they could twist the truth until it was unrecognizable. This was how they won. This was how they had always won. They didn't need to be right, they just needed to outlast you. My sister Maggie sat across from me, a cup of cold coffee untouched in her hands. "Claire, what are we going to do? We can't afford to fight this. Their lawyers bill more per hour than we make in a week." I stared at the papers, at the cold, legalistic language that reduced my son's desperate act of protection to a crime. And then I remembered the video. The recording on my phone. The one I had made 2 days before the wedding, when David came to pick up Evan for his pre-wedding visit. I had started recording all of our interactions months ago, after the first CPS case was dismissed, on the advice of a support group for parents of abused children. "Document everything," they had said. "They will try to gaslight you. Have proof." I had forgotten about it in the chaos of the wedding, but it was still there, a digital ghost, waiting. The hearing was a week later. We were back in the same courthouse where Judge Theodore Harrington had once presided, a fact that felt like a deliberate, cruel joke. The irony was so thick it coated my tongue like ash. David's attorney, a slick-haired man in a suit that cost more than my car, stood before the new judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Judge Alvarez, and delivered a performance worthy of an Oscar. He described Liam's unprovoked savage attack on a defenseless woman on the happiest day of her life. He spoke of the permanent psychological scars and the physical deformity she would now have to endure. He called my son a menace. Then it was our turn. My lawyer, a fierce, silver-haired woman named Patricia Okonkwo, who had taken the case for a fraction of her usual rate because these people make her physically ill, stood up. "Your Honor, We do not dispute the facts of the assault. Liam Harrington struck Melinda Harrington. He broke her nose. But we are here to provide the context that the plaintiffs have so carefully omitted. We are here to show a pattern of abuse, a conspiracy of silence, and a systemic failure by this family and the state to protect a minor child from a known predator. We are here to introduce Exhibit A. The courtroom fell silent. I watched David's face. He looked bored, confident. Judge Harrington, sitting in the gallery like a vulture, didn't even blink. They thought they had already won. Patricia plugged a tablet into the courtroom's AV system. The screen flickered to life. It was a video from my phone, grainy, a little shaky, but the audio was crystal clear. The date stamp showed 2 days before the wedding. The video showed my living room. Liam was sitting on the couch in the background, his face pale and tense, but he wasn't the focus. The focus was David, standing near the front door, his face twisted in that familiar, condescending sneer. Evan was standing beside me, his small hand clutching mine. Me. David, I'm telling you one last time. Liam told you what she did to him. He told your father. Are you really going to let Evan be alone with her this weekend? What if she hurts him, David? What if she does to him what she did to Liam? David. That's enough. It's over, Claire. Liam was confused. He was seeking attention. Melinda is my wife. She's the best thing that ever happened to this family. And you will stop poisoning these boys against us with your lies and your bitterness. You're just jealous and alone and you can't stand that we're happy. Me. Her brother muttered, not again at the engagement party. Multiple people heard him. They know she has a problem with children, David. Everyone in your circle knows, but you refuse to see it because you're afraid of your daddy's money drying up. David, his face flushing a dangerous red. That's a vicious lie. And even if it wasn't, we have the resources to handle any mistake. That's what family does. We protect our own. We handle things internally, and we will crush anyone who tries to tear us apart with these disgusting accusations. Keep it up, Claire, and you'll never see Evan again. I'll make sure of it. I'll bury you in legal fees so deep you'll never see daylight. The video ended. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever heard. It was a silence filled with the weight of a dozen unspoken truths crashing down on a single gilded room. I watched the blood drain from David's face. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The slick attorney beside him looked like he had just swallowed a live wasp. And Judge Harrington? The old man sat frozen, his face an unreadable mask of stone, but I saw his hands. They were gripping the wooden pew in front of him so hard his knuckles were white. For the first time in his life, he looked old and afraid. Judge Alvarez turned her gaze from the now blank screen to David's attorney. Her expression was one of profound, undisguised disgust. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a scalpel. Mr. Talbot, does your client wish to explain, under oath, why he knowingly and willfully endangered the welfare of a minor child to protect a woman with a known, documented history of inappropriate behavior with children? And does he wish to explain specifically what resources he was threatening to use to obstruct justice and intimidate the mother of his children? David's attorney stammered, Your Honor, that video was taken out of context. It was a private conversation. The context is crystal clear, Mr. Talbot, Judge Alvarez interrupted, her voice sharp as broken glass. The context is a father threatening to use his family's wealth to silence a victim and protect an abuser. Sit down. The old man, Judge Harrington, rose to his feet, his face reddening. This is a character assassination. That video is a violation of privacy. I demand it be stricken from the record. Judge Alvarez turned her cold gaze on him. Her voice dropped to a dangerously low register. Sit down, Mr. Harrington. You are not on the bench today. You are a spectator in my courtroom, and if you speak out of turn again, I will have the bailiff remove you. Consider yourself fortunate that you are not currently the subject of a judicial ethics investigation for your role in this sordid affair. The old man sat. He looked like a deflated balloon. In the end, the system didn't completely fail this time. It wobbled, creaked, and threatened to collapse under the weight of its own corruption, but it didn't fall. The civil suit was dismissed with prejudice. The emergency custody motion was denied. David's visitation rights with Evan were suspended indefinitely, pending a full independent investigation by a new CPS caseworker unconnected to the Harrington network. The judge even issued a temporary restraining order preventing David or any member of his family from contacting me, Liam, or Evan outside of supervised legal channels. It wasn't a total victory. David still had parental rights on paper. The system, even when it works, is a blunt, clumsy instrument that rarely delivers true justice. It protects the predators and their reputations far too often, and it re-traumatizes the innocent at every turn. Liam still had to give a deposition, reliving his abuse in a sterile room with a court reporter. Evan still had nightmares, waking up screaming about the mean lady with the sharp nails. We were still drowning in legal bills, and the emotional toll was incalculable. But something fundamental had shifted. The Harrington armor had been pierced. The whispers about Melinda's problem were no longer whispers. They were a scandal, albeit a quiet one, circulating through the gilded circles of Seattle society. The bottomless resources suddenly had a bottom, as donors and connections began to distance themselves from the stench of child abuse. And most importantly, my boys were safe. That night, we didn't sit at the dining table. Tables felt too formal, too much like the staged perfection of the Harrington household. Instead, we spread a picnic blanket on the living room floor and ordered 3 large pizzas. The kind with greasy pepperoni and extra cheese, the kind David had always sneered at as low class. Liam was showing Evan how to build a complex Lego spaceship. His hands, the same hands that had broken a woman's nose, were now steady and gentle, guiding Evan's smaller fingers to snap the tiny bricks into place. The bandage on his knuckles was a stark white reminder of the previous week's violence, but it didn't seem to bother him. Evan, who had been silent and withdrawn since the wedding, was finally talking again. He was pointing at the Lego instruction booklet with a furrowed brow of concentration. "The engine needs more blue pieces, Liam," he said, his small voice serious. "Blue makes it go faster." Liam grinned, a genuine lopsided smile that I hadn't seen in months. "You're the boss, buddy. More blue it is." Evan looked up at his brother, his big brown eyes wide and trusting. "Liam? Is the mean lady coming back? Daddy said she was going to be my new mommy, and I had to love her, but I don't love her. I love my real mommy." Liam's smile faltered for just a second. He put his arm around Evan's small shoulders and pulled him close. His voice was firm and certain, the voice of a boy who had been forced to become a man far too soon. "No, Evan, she's not coming back. She's afraid of us now. And if anyone else ever tries to hurt you, or make you keep secrets, or tell you that you can't talk to Mom, they'll have to deal with me. And Mom. We're a team, okay? The 3 of us." "Team awesome," Evan said, nodding solemnly. "Team awesome," Liam agreed. I watched them from the doorway to the kitchen, a forgotten glass of wine in my hand. The weight of the past week, the past 3 years, the past 15 years, pressed down on me. I thought about the special place in hell for those who hurt children. I thought about the disgusting, cowardly family that had protected a predator and silenced a child. David and his father and every single person who had known and done nothing, they should never have access to children again. They had failed both my boys in the worst way imaginable. The law might not strip David of his rights forever, the system is slow and flawed and often protects the abuser. But my son had done what 1,000 court orders couldn't. He had drawn a line, in blood, and I realized, standing there in the warm light of our messy, imperfect living room, that the sound of that cartilage breaking, that sick, wet, awful crunch, wasn't just the sound of violence, it was the sound of a chain snapping. It was the sound of a boy reclaiming his power. It was the only language the Harrington family understood, and Liam had spoken it fluently, out of pure, desperate, and ferocious love for his little brother. I walked back into the living room and sat down on the floor between my 2 boys, right on the edge of the picnic blanket. The pizza was half-eaten, the Legos were scattered everywhere. It was chaos. Beautiful, messy, safe chaos. Liam looked at me, a flicker of the old, uncertain boy in his eyes. "Are you still proud of me, Mom? Even after everything?" I put one arm around Liam and the other around Evan, pulling them both into a tight, fierce hug. I breathed in the scent of their shampoo and pizza grease and boyhood. "I am more proud of you than words can ever say, Liam," I whispered, my voice thick with tears I didn't bother to wipe away. "You protected your brother. You stood up to a family of bullies and liars. You are the bravest person I know, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you both know that you are safe, you are loved, and you are believed." Evan squirmed a little, then looked up at me with a smudge of tomato sauce on his cheek. "Mom, can we have ice cream now?" I laughed, a wet, broken, joyful sound. "Yes, baby, we can have all the ice cream you want." And honestly, I'm still proud of him. Every single day. Because sometimes, in a world where the system fails, and the powerful protect their own, the only justice that matters is the justice we make for ourselves. And my son, my brave, broken, beautiful son, had made it.